I'll move on now to rule number 3. Let's talk about permits. Okay. General definition of the word permit. It's based on the building code. I just tweaked this a little bit. Now I added a bit to it. A permit is basically a written authorization from the building official. Authorization to proceed with the work. When we say work, we mean construction, demolition, alteration, renovation, etc. Issued to an applicant once the plans, the specs, and other pertinent documents are found to be satisfactory and substantially conforming with the building code. So, again, this is parang the building official granting permission to the applicant. Now go, you can proceed with the construction or demolition or kung ano man yan. And this permit or this permission is only given once na-review yung plano, na-review lahat ng mga dokumento, and nakita naman na building code compliant naman yung design. That's the permit. Okay, that's the permit. When is it required? A lot of students think it's required for construction, okay, which is correct. But it's not entirely correct because it's also required for other activities, not the ones we defined earlier: alteration, repair, conversion, demolition, addition. All of those things require permits. Okay, permits. So maraming klase ng permit. Building permit yung pinaka-common, obviously. Pero may demolition permit, may excavation permit, etc. So those are the activities that require permits. We also have to mention yung tinatawag nating ancillary and accessory permits. Now, let's start with ancillary permits. Ancillary permits are supplementary permits required for the issuance of the building permit. Required ito, para makakuha ka ng building permit, dapat kumuha ka ng mga to. That's the idea. Parang, think of them as sub-permits. Sub-permits, or parang prerequisite permits, something like that. Okay? Without these ancillary permits, the building permit has no effect. It's invalid. No, it's null and void. So what are the ancillary permits? You have the architectural permit, the structural permit, electrical permit, mechanical permit, sanitary permit, plumbing permit, electronics permit, if applicable. So these are the different ancillary permits. Okay. The other thing is accessory permit. These are also supplementary permits. The only difference between this and yung ancillary kanina is itong accessory permits, they're only required for some buildings, no, as needed, parang as needed. Kasi yung itong mga ancillary, required talaga yan. Kailangan kuhanin yan. Itong accessory, parang the idea is, kukuhanin mo lang siya if it's required for the project that you have, the project that you're building. Okay? There are two types of accessory permits. No? Sabi ng building code, may accessory permits for certain accessory parts of the project with very special functions. If your building has the following, then supposedly you would get accessory permits for the following. Okay, so you have to have accessory permits now for bank and record vaults, swimming pool, firewall built separate from the building, industrial furnaces, concrete steel tanks, etc. There are others. Mahaba yung list. I didn't include everything, but these are just some examples. These accessory parts of the building, if present, require accessory permits. Okay, so that's the first kind. The second kind of accessory permits is for activities naman undertaken before you get the building permit or while the building permit is being processed. Now, sometimes, habang pinaprocess yung building permit, you want to like start excavation already, etc. So you can get accessory permits, so you can proceed with those activities kahit wala ka pang building permit. So some examples, ground preparation and excavation permit, sidewalk construction permit, fencing permit for fences more than 1.8 meters tall, and temporary sidewalk enclosure and sidewalk occupancy permit. So again, these are accessory permits. You normally get them as needed. Whereas the ancillary permits, you have to get them because without them, the building permit is invalid. They're required for the building permit. Marami kayong mahanap online examples if you don't know what these permits look like. But now we move to the next topic, which is the exemptions to the permit requirement. There are some works, some projects, some types of constructions that are considered minor and therefore hindi na kailangan ng building permit. So we have minor constructions, we have minor repairs. Let's start with minor constructions. Ano yung constructions that are considered minor? na kapag ganito yung project mo, no need na to get a permit because it's minor. So let's go over this list. Now they have a specific list of minor constructions. So you have minor structures, 6 square meters or less in area, detached from other buildings for private use only. Okay, this I think is the most important of the list in the list. Again, we're talking about a minor structure. Maliit lang daw. Gano'ng kaliit? 6 square meters or less. It must have from other buildings, and it must be for private use only, not public use. No? If you're wondering what could this be, 6 square meters or less, private use, detached from other buildings. The examples na binigay yung po, sheds, poultry houses, greenhouses, things like that. Okay? If what you intend to build is something like this, something this small, go ahead, build it. You don't need to get a permit for this. That's what we're saying. Okay, exempted not to it's the building permit requirement. Okay, other exemptions: an open terrace or a patio not larger than 20 feet on at ground level. Now that's exempted. No need to get a permit for that. No need for permits for window grills, garden pools that are half a meter deep or shallower. Also, garden masonry walls not exceeding 1.2 meters in height. These are all considered minor. These are all things that you can build or construct without getting a building permit because they exempted you as a building permit. Okay. Next, let's talk about repairs naman. Repairs that are minor, repairs that don't involve building permits. So you don't need to get a building permit for repairs that do not involve structural members, repairs of non-load bearing partition walls, meaning non-structural, repairs that do not involve addition or alteration, repairs of doors, windows, floors, fences, and walls, and repairs of plumbing fixtures. All of these repairs don't require permits anymore. Hindi mo kailangan ng permit. You can just go ahead and do the repair. Now, suppose that you do need to get a permit. Suppose na hindi ka pasok sa exceptions, so you need to get a permit. What are the requirements? Yung nakalista sa IRR are the following. So, obviously, the permits themselves, yung building permit application form, and then yung ancillary permits and required accessory permits. No? Obviously, lahat yan kailangan mo yung i-accomplish. But on top of these permit forms, you also have to submit the following. First, if you own the lot, kung saan itatayo yung building, then you have to submit a copy of the title. No? You have the OCT, or the TCT, basically titulo ng lupa yan. OCT is just original certificate of title. TCT is the transfer certificate of title. You have an OCT kung talagang kayo yung first registered owners of the land. But if you bought the land from another person, from a previous owner, then what you'll have is the TCT. Most people have TCTs because most people purchase the land from a previous owner. Either way, they're the same, titulo, basically. Dapat mag-submit ka ng kopya ng titulo, tax declaration, and real property tax receipt. All of these are intended to establish ownership of the property. Ito yung documentary proofs mo to show na you do own the land that you are going to build this project on. Okay, what if you don't own the lot? Okay, um, submit the contract of lease or the deed of absolute sale. If you don't own the lot, kunyari, tenant ka lang or parang re-rentahan mo lang yung lote for say 5 or 10 years, okay lang, pero you have to show the contract of lease. Okay, contract of lease is yung kontrato ninyo ng may-ari. Ikaw yung nagre-rent, siya yung nagpapa-rent. That document says na, yeah, payag siya, naka-lease sa'yo yung lote for say 10 years, and so magtatayo ka ng something dun sa lupa. So that's what you need to show. Okay? Dito sa absolute sale naman is slightly different. Ito yung binibili mo yung lupa, nabili mo na actually yung lupa, meron ka ng deed of sale, pero wala ka pang title, no? Wala ka pang title. Okay lang daw. Kahit wala kang title, kung meron ka ng deed of sale, no problem, submit the deed of sale. You honor yan for building permit purposes, according to the building code. Okay, so that's that. Next requirement is the plans. Okay, you have to submit 5 sets of the plans and the specs, and all other documents required, no, to be signed and sealed by the duly licensed professionals. There's a long list of all of these drawings and documents in rule number 3. Obviously, I can't go through the list. Haba ng list eh, pero please look at the list in rule number 3. Next requirement, clearances no, from other agencies. Pinaka-basic dito yung tinatawag na locational clearance no, sa City Hall or sa Municipal Hall. You have to get yung locational clearance um, for all projects. No, I think there are only a few exceptions from this requirement. Most projects would have to get locational clearance, and then other agencies, clearance from other agencies as required, depending on the location, depending on the situation, depending on project mo. You may also be required to obtain clearances from the ADO, sometimes the HNER, sometimes the DNR. So this is part of the requirements for the building permit. Okay. So when it comes to processing, I'll just make this quick. Ito yung parang step-by-step process. I won't go through the details, pero it starts with a building permit application step. Ito yung you submit the forms, it's checking the completeness ng forms, it's checking compliance with the zoning ordinance, etc. Next, the documents are routed to the line and grade section. Dito na i-check yung lot plan, no, ikaw-compare nila sa titulo, i-check yung compliance mo raw with easement requirements, setback requirements, may road widening ba, and anong effects sa project, verification of access to the street, no, na dapat meron kang daan papunta sa kalsada. Next, architectural section. So they check architectural things like types of construction, fire zone requirements, building projections, general requirements for buildings, height limitations, parking, occupant load, accessibility, light and ventilation. All of these things are checked by the architectural section. And then the plans are routed to the other places, the civil structural section, electrical, mechanical, sanitary, plumbing, electronics, and fire safety. Now, for fire safety, according to the building code, one set of the plans must be routed to the fire department, the fire marshal. Okay, so yeah, to check for compliance with the fire code. Okay, let's talk about issuance of permits. According to the building code, the permits must be released within 15 days from payment. It's possible, no, that the permit may only be given for the portion of the building, for a portion of the building, para partial building permit, there is such a thing. Meron din partial occupancy permit. And also, again, pwede kang kumuha ng excavation permit kahit wala ka pang building permit. Habang pinaprocess yung building permit, you may apply for that accessory permit, the excavation permit. Okay? Now, some basic terms and conditions of permits. Mga kondisyon no, sa permit. The first is the liability of the design professional and civil code. We'll talk about that later. We dedicated slide tayo for that, so I won't discuss that here. Next, requirement muna, terms and conditions. The building permit must be accompanied by the required ancillary permit. No, sinabi na natin yan paulit-ulit. And accessory permits as needed. Okay? Next condition, the project must conform with the building code. No, obvious. Next, a relocation survey must be performed by the owner prior to the commencement of the construction. Dapat magpa-relocation survey siya. Okay, required yan. Next, requirement, the building official must be given 10 days notice. Sorry, this is not the building official pala. This is the adjoining property, ito yung kapitbahay. Mamaya pa yung building official. Yung kapitbahay nyo, yung katabing lote, kumbaga, ng project, dapat mabigyan ng 10-day notice bago maghukay. Now, before you start excavation, you must have warned them 10 days prior na mag-start na kayo ng excavation. Next, other conditions of the permit. It's expected, it's required na merong supervisor yung construction. No, it should either be an architect or a civil engineer, and dapat may logbook siya. Okay. Next, after the construction is completed, that logbook, the as-built plans, and the certificate of completion must be submitted to the building official. What if there are changes? For changes, you must submit the proposed changes to the building official and wait for what they call the amendatory permit, a revised permit saying na okay, approved pa rin kahit nagbago na. Okay, that's the idea. Other conditions, you cannot occupy the completed building without an occupancy permit or certificate of occupancy. Yes, you do need to get a permit to occupy the building. You don't just need a permit to build the building, you also need a permit to occupy the building, meaning occupancy permit. And also, general condition, the permit does not exempt the owner from obtaining written clearances from other agencies. So just because you have a building permit doesn't mean absuelto ka na dun sa requirement na dapat may clearance ka raw from the ATO, Air Transportation Office, or sa DNR. Kung required kang kumuha ng clearance from the DNR, kumuha ka. Kapag later, kaya hindi ka kumuha, tapos later nahuli ka, sinabi ng DNR, bakit ka nag-build ng ganitong project, dapat kumuha ka muna ng permit sa amin. Hindi mo pwedeng gamiting excuse yung building permit. No? You cannot say na, well, you cannot question this anymore because we already have a building permit. Kasi why can't you do that? Because nakalagay nga, condition of building permit. The permit does not exempt you from from obtaining the required clearances from the other agencies. So, hindi mo pwede gamitin shield, kumbaga, yung building permit from those required clearances. Okay, other conditions. The project will be constructed by a licensed and registered contractor. No? Next, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, dapat may notification sa building official before you start the project. Now, there has to be a notice or notification to the building official that the project will commence. Para alam nila na nag-start yung project. And also, yung sinasabi din natin kanina, there should be a building permit signage throughout the duration of the construction. Okay? Now, let's talk about the first condition kanina. Dito ko na i-discuss yun eh. Yung liability clause from the civil code. Okay? The civil code is not normally something that we study as architects. But there is one part of the civil code, one article of the civil code that we study in detail, that we care a lot about. It's Article 1723, and we care about this because this explains ano yung liability ng architect kapag nag-collapse yung building. Ano yung pananagutan natin, ano yung extent ng pananagutan natin, or extent ng ating liability if the building collapses. So let's read what it says. Article 1723 says that the engineer or the architect who prepared or who drew up the plans and the specs for the building is liable for damages if within 15 years from the completion of the structure should collapse by reason of a defect in those plans and specs or due to the defects in the ground. So what we're contemplating here, the scenario that we're contemplating right now is natapos yung building, pero nag-collapse yung building within the first 15 years. Yung 15 years na yan, we measure it from the completion date. So essentially, the first 15 years of the building, nag-collapse siya. Kapag napatunayan daw na yung collapse was caused by a defect in the design, basically. I'm simplifying, but that's essentially what this is about. May problema sa design and the problem caused the collapse. Then, magiging liable for damages yung engineer or architect who prepared the plans. Basically, the engineer of record or the architect of record. Okay, sila yung mananagot. Because it's traceable to the design. Okay? Itong defect in the plans, even yung defects in the ground, what I always say about this, kasi this is a strange thing to say, defects in the ground. I think ang reason why yung mga yan is attributable pa rin sa engineer or sa architect is the ground kasi is the ground eh. There's really it's hard to argue that the ground is defective. No? It's hard to argue na tama yung design mo, but the ground was defective so the building collapsed. That's kind of parang a very flimsy argument to make. No? The ground is the ground, and your design should have been parang appropriate for the soil condition, for the soil type. So, in other words, this still boils down to the same thing, which is bad design. So I'm simplifying it. Basically, defective design, bad design, a collapsing building due to bad design during the first 15 years. Yeah, liable for damages yung architect or engineer. Now, a common question would be, between the two, engineer or architect, sino talaga yung mananagot? It's not very clear, to be honest. Now, I have read a few Supreme Court decisions about this. Actually, I read 2 or 3 eh. And in all of them, pareho masampahan ang kaso yung engineer and architect. Pero, binasa ko yung decision ng Supreme Court, hindi nila in-explain bakit damay pareho, ba't damay architect, ba't hindi structural engineer lang, etc. But anyway, the common interpretation of that is kung kanino man ma-attribute yung problema. Kung kanino ma-trace yung defect sa design, kung lumabas sa architectural plans pala yung problematic detail or nasa structural plan, then doon sila yung masasampahan ng kaso. Now, that's the common interpretation for that. But I will admit, hindi siya ganun para 100% clear. Even if you read the few Supreme Court cases involving this, hindi masyado kinlarify yung part na yun ng civil code. Pero anyway, the common interpretation again is, kung kanino man matrace, kung kanino ma-attribute yung fault, then siya yung magiging liable for damages. Again, this is for bad design. Ibang usapan kapag may collapse yung building not due to the design but due to the way that it was constructed. In other words, tama naman yung design pero mali yung pagkakagawa. I don't know, baka mali yung halo ng semento or mali yung ginamit na bakal, tinipid yung bakal or whatever. So nag-collapse yung building during the first 15 years. Kapag gano'n na yung usapan, obviously yung contractor na yung responsible. Kasi trabaho ng contractor yung construction. Hindi naman designer ang parang primarily responsible for the construction. So the contractor is responsible for damages if the building falls within the same period, 15 years, on account of defects in the construction or the use of inferior materials or due to any violation of the terms of the contract or the contract documents. If the engineer or the architect supervises the construction, kung di ba may full-time supervisor tayong tinatawag, kung yung engineer or architect of record yung kinuha full-time supervisor, then damay sila. They should be liable alongside the contractor. Pero kung hindi naman sila yung full-time supervisor, then this is the contractor's liability alone. Hindi madadama yung architect of record or engineer of record. Okay? Acceptance of the building does not imply waiver of this cause of action. Ang sinasabi lang yan is, kung mag-collapse yung building, tapos nagsampa ng kaso yung owner, kunyari sa contractor or sa architect of record, hindi pwedeng gamitin defense ng contractor na, inaccept nila yung building eh. Bakit kayo nagreklamo? Ba't sinasabi na hindi acceptable yung tinipid ko yung bakal or yung halo? Inaccept nyo naman yung building. Again, acceptance of the building is not waiver of this right. May karapatan si owner, may rights si owner to sue the contractor, and just because the owner accepted the building many years ago, does not mean na wini-waive niya na yung kanyang karapatan to sue or to file that case. And then yung prescription clause naman, all this says is the owner has 10 years to file a case. Kanya na nag-collapse yung building on the 10th year, pwede hindi agad magsampa ng kaso si owner. No? Pwede maghintay ng 10 years yung owner to file the case. Okay, Certificate of Occupancy, basic lang naman to. Sabi natin, you need permission to build the building. That's the building permit. But you also need permission to occupy the building. That's the occupancy permit. You cannot occupy the building without the occupancy permit. Requirements for the occupancy permit, yung COC, Certificate of Completion, the logbook, as-built plans and specs, and the building inspection sheet. Permits expire, no? Very quickly lang, two ways. So there are two ways by which the permit will expire. First, lumipas ang isang taon pero hindi nagsimula yung construction. The construction did not commence within 1 year of the issuance of the permit, then that permit would have expired. Second way na nag-expire yung permits, sinuspend or inabandon yung construction and hindi siya nag-resume after 120 days. Okay? The permit will expire. So you should not allow these things to happen. No, kasi otherwise the permits will expire. You'll have to get a new one. And it takes a lot of work to get the permit. So sayang yung effort. Next, non-issuance of the permit, suspension of the permit, revocation of the permit. The building official has this power to not issue, to suspend, or to revoke permits for the following reasons. Number one, may errors sa plans and specs, valid reason yan. Second, may maling data na na-declare, maybe mali lot area, mali building area, mali building height na na-declare. Reason yan to not issue or to suspend or revoke permits. And pinaka-obvious yung last, non-compliance with the building code. Obviously, kapag mayroong violation ng building code, pwede kang hindi bigyan ng permit or pwede i-suspend or i-revoke yung permits later on. Next, let's talk about the inspection and supervision requirement. This is a requirement of the building code. The owner is required to hire an architect or a civil engineer for the full-time supervision of the project. There has to be a full-time supervisor. And it must either be an architect or a civil engineer, and it's the owner's job to hire this full-time supervisor. This is not optional.